So ideas are sort of cheap, right? You know, anyone can have an idea, but to actually create value around an idea, you've got to work it. You've got to take it to the logical conclusions and do the things where it takes you.
Cambridge has an extraordinary history, not only as a site of academic excellence, but as a hub of scientific and technological development. Throughout the city, there are an enormous number of individuals and companies producing some of the leading products in biotechnology, computer gaming, and a whole raft of other technologies. So why is the city often poor at shouting about its success compared to other technological centres? In this series of short films, we'll be meeting some of those people and finding out more about the huge diversity of inventions and innovations coming out of Cambridge.
If I was giving an advert, I'd say, look, come to Cambridge, there's going to be so many opportunities here for anyone who's smart and hard-working, that there will be something here for you. And I don't know what the opportunity is, it depends on what your skills are and where your passion lies, but Cambridge is likely to be able to have something for you.
I think Cambridge is a really awesome place to work. There's so much around you to be inspired by and to just kind of take on board and use in your everyday work. There's science and there's music and there's art, and if you just look at the architecture of the colleges, is just crazy inspiring. I think it's just a really beautiful place. There's so much technology here as well. There's a lot of other games companies in Cambridge that you meet people from. You don't necessarily share direct project ideas, but you can. There's a real community. I think that's the important thing.
Because Cambridge is such a generous place, everybody wants to help everybody else. There is very little competition. If you go back to the Sinclair and Acorn days, there was competition then. There's very little competition these days between the different companies, because the mindset is one where we want to help each other to be successful.
The university here is very much a huge part of the town. There are a lot of other places that have great universities, but it's just one of the things that you find in the city, whereas here so much of the city seems to be around the university or have spun out from the university in some way. A lot of the industries are connected to the university, and that I think is a very healthy environment. It's part of the reason I love living here. I came here some scary fraction of a century ago now to do my undergrad, thinking I would be here for just 3 years, and I've never left.
And I think one of the challenges for Cambridge is the land space that's available, because by staying horizontal, that means that you probably need to have more land available. We have a green belt policies around, which I think everybody is very comfortable with, but we have lots of buildings which can go from sort of single story to multiple story and maintain that horizontal city approach.
There's one thing I could change about Cambridge that would make it easier and cheaper to get a house to live here, because the biggest constraint is going to be people, and pricing large numbers of people out of the market is a tragedy. So I know that there's a lot of people who disagree with me, but I would take that big green belt around Cambridge and I'd plop tower blocks on it, and I'd let many more people come and live here, so that they can enjoy the same benefits that the people who can afford it, like me, can get now.
Cambridge's weak suit is going to be sales and marketing. It's not as good as Americans at sales and marketing. We're not as confident as people in talking about money and pricing and things like that. We're a bit sheepish about doing those things. It's being overcome, and there are lots of examples of people now who have overcome those kinds of difficulties. But many of the very successful sales and marketing people have come over from America.
So the straightforward answer to does Cambridge sound like a bushel is yes. There is no great coherence about the way it markets or communicates about itself to the world, and that's what it is. Certainly when I see, for example, Tech City in London, where they've got a marketing budget and they can somehow persuade large numbers of people something's happening, when the base here in Cambridge is so much more robust and solid. It makes me think that maybe, we should steal with pride and adapt with glee.
I guess one challenge that Cambridge has is competing for attention. And particularly in the light of the recent emergence of the Shoreditch tech cluster, it can be very hard, even though we're only an hour from London, it can be very hard for us to compete for, particularly for government attention against an aspiring tech cluster. I don't think it is a tech cluster yet, but an aspiring tech cluster, which is only 3 or 4 miles down the road from Westminster. And it's a real challenge. We do need to spend more of our time. It's really tempting to kind of hunker down and just do the stuff. But we have to remember that the value of a cluster comes from scale. If we lose scale, we lose value. And therefore, I think we do need, alongside continuing to do the great businesses here in Cambridge, we do need to spend a lot of time talking about exactly why we are the best tech cluster in the UK, one of the 2 or 3 best tech clusters in the world.
Cambridge is very compact, very condensed, and we don't have any high-rise blocks. So, if you're in New York and you're in a cluster of companies there, you may be 33 floors away from the person that you don't know about that actually could help you on solving a particular problem. Whereas in Cambridge, you're going to bump into that person as you go into a coffee shop or into a restaurant or whatever else.
Cambridge we have a critical mass. That's the thing. We have, this is what makes clusters work. This is why Silicon Valley works. This is why Cambridge works. You have critical mass. You have non-linear effects. You double the number of technically literate people in a cluster. You make the cluster much more than twice as powerful. It really is, one of a very small number of places in the UK that could really call themselves a cluster. I guess alongside Oxford, maybe alongside the Silicon Industry cluster around Bristol. It really is, a very rare phenomenon.
So is there a movement from the individual genius sort of sitting in this lonely room doing brilliant work, and then suddenly now that's not possible anymore, and now it's a team? So the first thing is, I'd say, I suspect that the individual genius doing things by themselves and somehow doing everything was always a bit of a myth. And that's something that we find easy to understand as opposed to something that was true. And then is the team more important? Well, what does the team bring? The team brings wider experiences, more knowledge than any one person can work with. It's also much more fun working in a team, which is something well worth remembering, because you've only got one life. So sitting in a lonely tower doing work all by yourself for 50 years, even if that was a successful way of doing great innovation, would probably be an unsuccessful way to be happy. Working in teams is much more fun. The most important invention that came out of the idea of Cambridge was the idea of the idea of producing chips without having to own the factories or to own the design. So there's a lot of very fantastic Cambridge companies like ARM and CSR and others, where they basically realised you didn't have to have everything. You didn't have to have the fab. You didn't have to have all these. You could just own the IP in the middle of it, and that's an incredibly powerful idea that's made a number of companies here very rich and successful. But has also made the world a better place. That because they were unshackled from the needs of production, they produced better work, and everyone's carrying iPads and iPhones around with them, full of these chips produced by companies in Cambridge that just wouldn't have existed if that idea hadn't really taken off.
There have been a whole load of inventions that have come out of Cambridge, some of which even people in Cambridge don't know about. So perhaps one of the biggest is the ARM microprocessor, which is in almost every mobile phone and a whole load of other devices now. It's in my watch, for example. My watch now has an ARM in it, and it's one of the UK's biggest companies, and it essentially developed from work that had come out of little research labs and small companies in Cambridge. There have been other things in the computing world that people are familiar with, like the Raspberry Pi, the very small computer, which I think is a great teaching aid.
If I had to pick my favourite Cambridge invention, it would be the BBC microcomputer. Right? It's no surprise, I guess. This is something that one of the wonderful things about Raspberry Pi, I've got to meet the people who did the BBC Micros. I got to meet Sophie, and I got to meet Steve Ferber, Chris Curry, Herman Hauser. All of those people who were involved in creating this invention, which another invention that I think wasn't expected to sell a lot of units and went on to change a lot of lives, including my own. Cambridge does this stuff. And like I say, I think Cambridge does it better than anywhere else.
So Cambridge University has been around for a very long time, and the fundamental research that was done in universities all over the world that created microelectronics in the first place is really, really significant. Without that, there would be no microchips. I think of what I've done in my career as simply being the use of other people's inventions. I've done designs, not invent. And you get humbled by people who really did invent something from scratch where there was nothing before at all. Before ARM, there were other processors. There were even other RISC processors. I just designed a different one.
One of my favorite stories is about Dustin Hoffman in The Graduate, which is now getting rather old, and not many people have seen The Graduate, but he is encountered by the side of the swimming pool by one of his father's friends, who says to Dustin Hoffman's character, "I only have one thing to say to you, my boy," he said, "plastics." And so life from the 1960s to today has changed enormously, from wanting to work in a large corporation and thinking about one's pension rights and these sorts of things. And that's almost the last thing that any young aspiring entrepreneur thinks about today. Pensions is something that may or may not happen in the future. So my advice to people is follow your dream, but follow it assiduously, go at it hard. Find people who you enjoy working with and work with them, because that's incredibly fulfilling.